right, so let's go ahead and dive in. So how did you start the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard? What sparked this idea, and how did you get it going?
Well, let me start with what sparked the idea, because it took a little while between the spark and the ignition, shall we say. I came to the world of investment advice sort of mid-career. This was over 20 years ago, and I came at it through a wonderful advisor in Northern Virginia by the name of Don Rembert.
Mm-hmm.
And Don Rembert, who's now 83, I think, and is somewhat retired, but he'll never retire. He was one of those fee-only planners from literally the mid-70s who was out advocating for fiduciary advice.
Mm-hmm.
And he would walk, as a matter of course, he would walk around with a copy of the Uniform Prudent Investors Act, and which was a pretty darn good sort of summary of what it meant to be a fiduciary.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what he did. And when I started working with him, as a marketing advocate, frankly, he would give it away to anybody who would take it. So that's what started it. Literally in the late 1990s, and that sort of, we did different things over the next several years before we actually formed 10 years ago. But that was the spark.
Wonderful. And then now that you've got it going, how are you helping to live that out? What sort of things have you put into place to ensure that mission is
I'll get to that in a second, but we are above and beyond, public policy entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And you understand by definition what it means to be an entrepreneur,
mm-hmm.
because that's what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a part of that, timing is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And the Institute, actually, the beginnings of it came 2 years before. Now we're in 2009. And in 2009, in June of 2009, the Obama administration, Treasury Department, said that all brokers should work at a level to meet a fiduciary standard. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of a group before that said that there should be a special interest group,
mm-hmm.
a single interest group that did nothing else except to educate and advocate mm-hmm. for fiduciary practices and principles mm-hmm. for investors, to advisors, and to policymakers. And so our beginning actually was in June 2009. And when several of us got together at a conference and just sort of said, there should be a group that does this.
Mm-hmm.
And we formed it. And the point of that little bit of the story is timing. Mm-hmm. And in 2009, with the new Obama administration, fiduciary was in the air mm-hmm. and was much talked about. Mm-hmm. In a sense, much more talked about then than it is now. So that was the real beginnings of it then.
And how do you feel you've been able to keep that alive? And keep that.
Well, that's good. A lot by luck,
uh-huh.
and a lot by my background is undergraduate in political science, and then a graduate degree in business, an MBA.
Mm-hmm.
And part of Marketing 101
mm-hmm.
that I recalled was about the importance of starting a venture with a purpose, with a clear purpose, which of course is very much in the air now, but also the significance of having individuals involved whose very stature and position mm-hmm. and reputation spoke volumes
mm-hmm.
and sent messages. And we were very fortunate that very early on, I literally made a cold call to the office of John C. Bogle, the former chair of Vanguard. And I said that we had started this group and I wanted to talk to him about it. And, there was no other reason for him to take my call because I wasn't in his Princeton network or his school network. But he said, I'm giving a speech in 2 months in Washington on fiduciary. Come up to my office and let's talk. And it sounds happenstance, and in a sense it was, because that conversation started a relationship that ended until he passed away 3 years ago. And he served on our advisory board. But the point is, we were able to attract real luminaries in the world of investing. And one of our first events was to put on a day-long program in New York City at the Museum of Finance on the legacy of Jack Bogle. And we had the most respected academics and former regulators there, with us, including Paul Volcker, who was a giant in this world. And so the answer to your question, in probably a little bit more words than you wanted, was we were fortunate to get certain people involved that sent hugely important messages about who we are, why we existed, and what we wanted to do. And so that was extremely important. And when you start there, some of the other pieces, putting the pieces together, becomes a whole lot simpler, frankly, because when you've got individuals like that involved, they have an understanding of what you are trying to do without necessarily knowing who you are. So anyway,
getting behind that mission. Yeah.
So anyway, that was the beginning. And Jack served on our board of advisors for years. He joined us at meetings at the SEC. And it's hard to appreciate sort of how much he meant to the world of investors, that in investing in the interest of investors. There's no one like him in the industry today, frankly, and partly that's understandable because he was a product of his time. But anyway, that was extremely important in terms of getting introduced into the marketplace and people understanding who you were and what you were doing. So,
well, today, even, you look at your board of advisors and the folks that you have just on your website. The connections you've been able to make. You use the word luminaries earlier, right? These are names that carry weight in the industry and have influential voices. So it's been very impressive how you've been able to, pull that group together. And how are you going about?
I say it's luck, and yes, it was. Jack Bogle didn't have to take my call 12 years ago. But and I don't know how things would have been very different, frankly. But he took my call. We met. We had the event. And, it turned out by most people that were there as being a very good event. So that was the starting point. Now, today, fast forward, of course, the field and the world has changed. And, we're very fortunate to have, individuals like Luis Aguilar, only the third SEC commissioner selected by both parties. In this political world, but also, a really genuinely fiduciary person and personality in terms of his advice. And so he is, he's there. We have Tamar Frankel. If you want, I know, most people say, well, who's Tamar Frankel? Well, I call her the godmother of fiduciary law in the Western world, and she frowns at me when I say that because because part of who she is she truly is humble.
Mm-hmm.
Tamar Frankel was born in 1925 and grew up in Israel. She started, and in that real world there, which was pretty tumultuous, and came over here, I think in the late 60s, and started her academic career. Her first job, and talk about humility. She was the first woman professor of law at Boston University, and she was put in the basement of the building because she was a woman. But so if you
and
ever
here she
wanted
is today. Yeah.
Oh no, I mean she's, but there's not a, I've only known her for 12 years. Again, I just feel fortunate to have known her for this long, but she's extraordinarily humble. And and there's not an iota of bad feeling because she was put in the basement. She said, Knut, that made me closer to the books, and it made me easier to do my research.
I love it. Always seeing the positive, no matter what, right?
Well, no, exactly. So, I just feel so fortunate to have had a little piece of experience with her, because she's on our board, and she calls me about every other week if we don't speak and says, Knut, what can I do to help you? And, and here I am, she is the leader of fiduciary law in the Western world, and she's asking me what she can do to help me. And it just makes me feel just unbelievably fortunate. So we have those individuals. Phyllis Borsey, different category, but the same thing. Phyllis Borsey was put on this earth to serve investors. After she became, after she was an English teacher. I said, Phyllis, that's one of the reasons I love you, because you know how to write plainly and clearly. And so many people in the world of finance don't, or can't, or either the two. So yes, we are very fortunate. And when you have leaders like that associated with you, it makes attracting other individuals, other firms, that much easier, because that is a screen of sorts. So anyway, so this is at a strategic level in terms of communications. What does it mean to have Frankel and Borsey and Aguilar, on your, associated with your organization? Well, it means that you're extraordinarily fortunate, and that's what I feel. And so that's what has been a huge part in attracting others, our advisor members, who have become real fiduciary advisors, are others on the advisory board. And I haven't even mentioned Ron Rhodes. If there is no other person in today who has written more and understands better as both a academic scholar and as a practitioner. He also is a practicing advisor than Ron Rhodes on what fiduciary means and what its background is. I mean, literally no one. And we've been fortunate to have lots of scholars involved in our programs. And so, we just feel very, very, very fortunate.
No, it's a very impressive group. So I think one of the hardest things to do, right, is to build that center of influence, or that gravity, and have a board with talent that can help to challenge the organization and push it forward as it aligns with the mission. And so it's impressive to see what you've been able to build. And
actually, you hit on something that is probably the another side to this, that notwithstanding the luminaries, there is still the basic organizational task, as you referenced, as you allude to, of building an organization and building out programs and events and what we're going to deliver. And probably sometimes some people may think that, that we don't need any help because we've got all these luminaries involved when in fact, we are representing a view of advice that only a minority of firms frankly adhere to. Mm-hmm. And so we are a minority, and we understand that in this larger world of broker dealers and larger world of dual registrants. Mm-hmm. And that our message of fiduciary, I think, strikes some people as being too, shall we say, old-fashioned. Mm-hmm. And sort of not current. Mm-hmm. And and in a certain respect, they are correct. Mm-hmm. Because and you by definition are avidly paying attention to what is happening in the industry. Mm-hmm. And it's not traditional lessons on fiduciary. Mm-hmm. is not the topic du jour. Mm-hmm. It's Robin Hood. Mm-hmm. And what does Robin Hood represent? Mm-hmm. It's sort of another it's the other end of the spectrum, frankly. But anyway.
Well, I think so I've seen a little bit of kind of the interaction. I know, just looking at when you all had rolled out the Fiduciary Standard best practices, sort of that code. Yep. Of contact and code of conduct, and partnering with RIAs and yep. such, and was able to be read into or see a little bit of behind the scenes about that rollout, right? And the messaging, you talked about that earlier, and just you all had that locked in, right? That you have the press releases ready, you've got the communications ready, you've got people teed up, and I'm sure that probably those best practices also just come from knowing communications and messaging, having great people around you. But how do you ensure that messaging is uniform across the board, and that maybe it doesn't have that kind of older feel, but there is something that's really invigorating and holding people to that higher standard and those best practices? I just love to hear a little bit more about how you all think about messaging and communications as you talk to the broader audiences. So
that is a really good question. And, I guess it's easiest for me to think about it in a global perspective, as I have tried to become better at our messaging over time. And what I mean by that is I have a much greater respect for and sensitivity for what we learn from the plain language experts. Mm-hmm. And so, this is not per se messaging, but it is such a key piece of it in the world which we work in, that is dominated by regulatory speak. Mm-hmm. And which is sometimes almost seems to be the opposite. Mm-hmm. From plain language, frankly. And so part of our and it's sometimes not stated, is that our outreach to investors or advisors and or regulators, those are our three main audiences, mm-hmm. is driven by the idea that the ordinary investor on Main Street can understand what we're saying. Mm-hmm. So what that means to us is, if you look at our real fiduciary practices, which are on our website now, they are written so that an investor could read them and actually understand what they mean without having to hire an attorney to
legal
tell them
counsel,
what
yeah.
and to me, this always made sense to me, but it makes more sense to me today than it did 5 years ago, because I realize how much out there, and you realize this in your role as a marketing expert, how much content out there in the world investing is not made to be understood by the ordinary person on the street.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, I think it's not made for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at our real fiduciary practice, when we look at our common sense, fiduciary common sense on our website, again, we have tried to make it understandable. Mm-hmm. And so that's, and this may not be exactly what you were looking for, but that sort of drives, our messaging mm-hmm. Across the board in terms of, what is the common denominator, and it's making it understandable to the ordinary investor. Mm-hmm. So the whole issue from a regulatory point of view, and I don't know how much you sort of interface with this. The whole issue from a regulatory point of view, that the big problem with regulation and retail investors is they're confused. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the operating premise. And I say, no, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. And we've written extensively on why this is wrong. What is true is that the messages they get are confusing. Mm-hmm. And that's a different take on it. And so the problem is not that per se investors don't understand. It is per se that the message they're getting are confusing. So now I'm right in your bailiwick in a way, I think.
No, it's so fair, right? Some of the hardest things to do are to make things simple.
Yes.
Thinking to make things simple can be very challenging. So, but that is, I think, where you actually get traction, and you can get momentum going with that. So, it's exciting. So some themes really around the essence of building an all-star board, right? People that you trust, that you can turn to, that can help move things forward. And then in doing so, as you're moving forward, that there's a unified front on the simplicity of the messaging, so that, gosh, if someone were to pick a piece of paper off the, ground and they were to read it, they would at least understand like what was going on, and it wasn't totally out of context. So
yes, that is exactly it.
Okay.
And, as I say, I didn't appreciate when we started how important that piece is to what we are doing, what we're aiming to do. But it is absolutely key. And I didn't have as I said, I didn't appreciate how much I think investors are given a bum rap in the industry by many people, because they're just assumed to be confused about everything. And so, almost why bother even trying to communicate with them? And I think that's a bum rap. But I think more basically, it's it is a serious problem if our assumption is that our major audience of investors doesn't understand anything we say. That's a problem.
Yeah, it's
put it mildly.
Yeah, be able to digest it and for it to make sense for decision making.
Exactly. So
yeah. No, that's well, you're doing powerful work. And like I said, being able to see a little bit of behind the scenes of some of the rollout, and then also just publicly what you have, on your website, and the connections that you've been able to build, and the work you're doing. So what is it like on a day-to-day? What's next for the Institute, and what do you see on the horizon as key focus areas?
After just talking about how important it is to aim our messaging for the ordinary investor, I'll say that our strong point has not been, frankly, to get out and reach the ordinary investor. It's not just because that's a massive audience, because there are lots of, and again, this is your bailiwick now, not mine, frankly. There are lots of ways to get to smaller parts of this in the world of social media that are less daunting than they were before social media, frankly. But so, we think that we've done fairly well aiming and getting our message across to regulators and policymakers, those who are interested in our message. And we think to some degree that we've done the same with advisors, the finding ways to do the same thing to consumers, because that's where that's where the action is.
Mhm.
And again, this is your bailiwick. So I'll let you finish this point in terms of the importance of
Yeah.
getting to the consumer audience.
Oh, the masses are always hard, right? But I think that you have to sort of start at the core, right? In those conversations and being aligned there, which you is impressive to see the work that you all have been doing. So that's sort of the next path is that opening up that channel of
Yes.
sort of behind the folks that may be more familiar with it, the policymakers, the RIA firms, et cetera, and then exploring next steps to more of the public information of what it means to be a fiduciary or
No, right. I mean, we stand back, and the way that I frame it is, why should an investor or consumer, because my financial planning friends remind me
mm-hmm,
that in the world of financial planning, they think of consumers more than they think of investors, because of when you, and again, this extremely well, when you look at their array of services, the investment part of it is just one piece of it as opposed
mm-hmm.
to everything else. So getting to the broader audience of consumers is the key challenge.
Yep,
And
it's fair.
uh, so
All in due time, right? So
all in due time.
yes.
But to I don't think I respond to part of your question. We stand back and say, why should a consumer care?
Mm-hmm,
Why should the consumer think it matters
mm-hmm,
that they hire an individual who is a real fiduciary that practices as a fiduciary as opposed to those that don't? So
mm-hmm,
that's where we start the process from, and thinking about what is it that we can inform consumers of that
mm-hmm,
answers that question, why they should care, and then what is it that makes a fiduciary advisor different from those that are not fiduciary advisors,
mm-hmm.
and that's what it comes down to. And so that sort of is the focal point of our thinking about messaging for consumers generally.
Yep, no, that's fair. And getting that education out into the world in a
Right,
digestible way, as we were talking about
right.
earlier too, right? Where it's an engaging way and it sticks. So very good. Well, I appreciate you sharing a little bit about, how things got going, being able to build the board, and where they are today and going and where they're going. Any other thoughts that you think would be
Well,
helpful
the
to share?
well, I guess in terms of other segments or other places that we want to get more involved in,
Mhm.
is the area of students who are studying to not who are studying to become financial planners.
Mhm.
We have had contacts with a number of the programs around the country,
Mhm.
but we haven't done enough to formalize those relationships and to really see how we can help these programs in their educational process by sharing the content
Mhm.
and the expertise and the individuals that we have involved in the institute. So
Mhm.
that's another area that we want to pursue.
Interesting. Um, well, I'm excited to hear a little bit more about it too. And I think you all have done an amazing job too. You're talking about the kind of those guidelines that were been released from the various RIA firms, but some of that messaging and arming them with the communication so that they can better educate their prospects and those in the
Bingo.
as well.
Yes.
And then kind of if you're thinking about the marketing hats on, right, that funnel, they're a little deeper in the funnel, those prospects, because they're already having that conversation with the advisor. But how do you talk to kind of that top of the funnel, your general audience about this and what they should be looking for if they're looking for an advisor to work with, so that that's not off their
Exactly.
radar and they can ask those questions, or they know to ask those questions
Exactly.
when they're finding the right match. So very good. Well,
Great.
again, thank you for your time. Really appreciate hearing a little bit more behind the scenes. And we'll make sure to include links to the website and the other resources as well below. So
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you, Lauren, for your interest in what we're doing. And I really appreciate it, and look forward to keeping in touch as we go forward.
absolutely. I'm looking forward to it as well. Have a great night, and
You too.
we'll be in touch soon.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.